I have the hat all cut now and joined together. I pieced an area back here on this flap, and the same on the other side. The band, I pieced that area there on the band, and on this top flap, I did piecework there. So they all match. It's just a matter of that's how I did it. The front brim, I'm going to be use a leather backing, and I put a stabilizer on that leather backing. This is a press-on fabric. Otherwise, you could use iron-on fabric, but I think it gives it a little nice structure. So I'm going to start joining this up. I do my brim, and then I sew my flaps together at the center backs, the set, and then I'll join my flaps together, and then I'll put my crown on the band, and then I'll sew the brim on, somewhat in that order. So we'll get started on that next. I started with the band, and I joined the center back of the band, and then I took the crown and I tacked the crown at midway points, the back, the front, and the sides. Now when I sew this, there's a little bit of fullness for the band to the crown. So you just have to hold that in a little bit, and it sews really well. So after this is done, then I'll put my brim on, and we'll go from there. So while you're sewing, you just want to make sure that your hair is tucked down real well, and it joins up pretty well. So here we go. I'm getting ready to press these, and what I do ahead of time is I either take my fur knife or my fingernail and I run over my seams so that they don't have quite as sharp of a ridge. I've got a hat block underneath this, or a head form, so I'm going to use that to press this edge. And what you just do is you take a medium warm iron and you lay it on that edge, and you just press it down. And I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it because I am using just one hand, but you get the idea. And it will help that seam to lay nice. Now on your brim, what I do is I turn that fur side out, and I take a piece of fabric. This is a piece of silk that I use just specifically for pressing. And I lay that on top, and I've already done that on the perimeter of the brim where I've, ran my finger on that seam, got that nice and smooth. I'm going to come back, lay this over this, and probably give it like a 3 or 4 count. Hold my iron on that seam edge. I can feel it. And just get that so it's pressed down. You don't want to use a lot of heat, but once this is done, your brim is going to have a nice finish to it because it's going to lay nice and smooth. So you can do it on the fur side too. I prefer to do it on the leather side, but sometimes you use a double fur brim, so whatever you do. Now the same thing is going to hold true for your flaps. I've got my flaps, I've got them turned, I've got that seam, finger pressed, if you want to say it, or, the back of your fur knife pressed. And now I'm going to take this and hold this as best I can while I'm pressing, so I get that seam edge rolled to the point where I want it. And then I'll take my iron and lay that on, take my press cloth, lay it on top, and then press it for maybe a count of 3. You don't want to do it too long because you don't want to scorch your fur underneath or shrink it, But this is going to make this hat band, or I mean these ear flaps, lay real nice when they're joined to the hat band. So we'll take care of that, and then the next thing we're going to do is join our ear flaps up to our hat band and put our brim on. This is how it looks after I've got it pressed. So I think they look really good. The crown sits nice, and now we're going to join the brim to the front of the hat and the ear flaps to go around, and we've got our hat joined. So I have to put the ties on and the lining and the grosgrain ribbon next. I'm ready to join the brim and the ear flaps to the band, to the body of the hat. So what I like to do is start at the center front, and I tack the center front of the bottom of the brim to the center front of the bottom of the band. Then I come over here. This is where I join that small seam up, and this is the top brim here, and this is the top flap here. And I take that seam and I put that on my other hash mark, which is right there, and I tack that right there at the brim. And I do the same on the other side of the brim, tack that. I'm going to sew this from the center to the side, from the center to the side. After I've got that on, I like to go to the center back of the hat, and I tack the center back of my under flap to the center back of my band. And I'm going to sew this from the under brim spot where this joined up to the center back of the hat on both sides, from the front to the center back, because if there's any additional fullness, I can always take it out of this center back seam. Otherwise, if you sew the opposite direction, you're just going to have, you might end up with just too much correction that you're going to have to make. So there is a little bit of fullness that's allowed on this pattern for the ear flap piece to kind of like be held into the hat band. That's why it's important to tape everything. But we'll get that joined up and it should look good. I usually don't use these clippies, but I wanted to hold this in place while I showed you what I was doing. And after we get this on, then we're going to put our grosgrain ribbon. I'm going to show you a little trick. So I use grosgrain ribbon, the inch wide for my hat bands usually. And, you know, it's straight, but I like to give it a little bit of curve. So what I do is I cut this a little longer than the circumference of my hat band at the bottom, and I take a warm iron or hot iron, and I start at the center and I pull this down and around to the side. It's kind of hard to show you with just one hand, but I press this and I pull this down and around, and what it does is it gives that straight piece a little arch, and you kind of have to hold it and press it and pull it at the same time. So I do one half, then I flip it over, and I do the other half. But what it does is it kind of gives a natural arch to this grosgrain ribbon, and it will sit nice inside the hat. So the longest side will go, and I'll sew that to the fur, and then this side will be the finished side that gets sewn to the lining. So it'll lay just, you know, there's going to be definitely at the bottom of this and the top of this. So it will curve a little bit more naturally, like going around a circle that way. And it makes a nice finish on the inside of the hat, I think. Before we put the lining in, we're going to attach this grosgrain ribbon. And that goes and it gets attached to the fur edge all the way around, which is the bottom of the hat brim and the bottom of edge of the ear flaps. I start at the center and sew around to the center back. Start at the center, sew around to the center back, and I leave a little excess because we're going to tuck that in and finish it off nicely with in the lining. So I have put this on my hat block and measured to make sure that it fit good. You want to do that before you put your grosgrain ribbon on. Your grosgrain ribbon is a stabilizer. It is going to hold this hat from stretching. So if there anything that needs to be adjusted in size, do that before you put your grosgrain ribbon on. For the hat lining, I use a quilted polyester fabric that I get at Wawak sewing supply. It has a little bit of loft, just about the right amount, I feel. I used to be able to get it in a 1-inch quilt or a 1/2-inch quilt. This is 1 inch, and it works good. I just use my hat band pattern for the lining. Cut it a little extra with the selvage, and use the crown pattern likewise for the crown. And I mark my hash marks on the back side so I know front to back, and I'll do that also on this. So what we're going to do is join this up at the top edge by regular sewing machine, and then what I also like to do is come back after that's joined up and I top stitch this selvage edge after it's stitched to the crown so it holds nice and it's not going to be mushy on the inside. So I'll show you what that looks like when it's done. I joined up the hat lining. So this is the crown, this is the band, and then I went around and towards the crown side, I top stitched all the thicknesses from that seam towards the crown side. So after I had that done, then I trimmed that seam real nice so there's no extra bulk on the inside of the lining. The center back, I only closed from the crown down by sewing machine about 1 inch. The rest I'm going to close by hand after I get the lining in the hat. I did put my label in, but this will work great. And it's what's nice about this nylon is it's a polyester. It's anti-static, so it's not going to give people like a lot of electricity and on the inside of the hat with their own hair. And it cleans up nice. It's black. It won't show stains, so I prefer black. I do use a dark brown, but I prefer black.